Across the vast expanse of our planet lies a collection of places so strange and beautiful they seem borrowed from dreams, or conjured by some cosmic artist with an imagination far beyond human comprehension. These landscapes defy our everyday understanding of what Earth should look like, presenting visions that challenge the boundaries between reality and fantasy. They're not products of digital manipulation or artistic license, but genuine terrestrial wonders sculpted by geological forces, climatic conditions, and the patient work of millions of years. To stand before them feels like stepping through a portal into another dimension, one where the familiar rules of topography and color cease to apply. Deep in the Colombian wilderness, where the eastern Andes descend toward the Amazon basin, flows a river unlike any other on Earth. Caño Cristales stretches through the Serranía de la Macarena, a remote mountain range that rises like an ancient island from the surrounding plains. For most of the year, this waterway appears unremarkable, its clear waters flowing over smooth bedrock, revealing little of the magic contained within. But when conditions align during a brief window between wet and dry seasons, typically from late May through November, something extraordinary occurs. The river transforms into what locals have long called the liquid rainbow, or the river of five colors, and witnessing this metamorphosis feels like watching the earth itself come alive with impossible pigmentation. The transformation happens through the blooming of Macarenia clavigera, an endemic aquatic plant that carpets the riverbed in dense colonies. These organisms possess a remarkable sensitivity to water levels and sunlight intensity. When the river runs too high, they're submerged in darkness. When water levels drop too low, they're exposed to desiccating air. But during that perfect transitional period, when the water flows shallow enough for sunlight to penetrate yet deep enough to nourish the plants, they explode into vibrant color. The Macarenia shifts through a spectrum that defies belief, displaying brilliant reds, magentas, and pinks that interweave with the yellow sands, green algae, blue waters, and black rocks beneath. The result resembles a liquid stained glass window stretching for nearly 100 kilometers through pristine wilderness. Walking along the banks of Caño Cristales during its peak bloom feels like entering a hallucination. And the water itself seems to have become chromatic, as though someone dissolved rainbows into the current. Where sunlight strikes the shallow pools, the colors intensify to an almost painful brilliance. The reds glow like arterial blood, so vivid they appear backlit. These scarlet patches give way to sections where yellows dominate, created by the river's sandy bottom showing through. Green mosses and algae contribute emerald tones, while deeper channels retain the crystalline blue typical of pure mountain waters. Black rocks interrupt this chromatic symphony with dark punctuation marks, their ancient volcanic surfaces worn smooth by centuries of flowing water. The entire scene shifts and changes with the angle of light, the depth of water, and the position of the observer, creating an experience that's never quite the same twice. The geological story beneath this biological spectacle proves equally fascinating. The Serranía de la Macarena represents one of the oldest rock formations in South America, a Precambrian shield that has existed for approximately 1.2 billion years. This makes the bedrock beneath Caño Cristales older than most complex life on Earth. The mountains themselves formed through tectonic uplift, creating an isolated ecosystem that serves as a meeting point for three major Colombian biomes: the Andes, the Amazon, and the Orinoco. This convergence produces extraordinary biodiversity. Scientists have cataloged over 550 species of birds, 1,200 species of insects, and countless plants unique to this region. Many species found here exist nowhere else on the planet, having evolved in isolation within this geological refuge. The river's ecological significance extends beyond its visual spectacle. The Macarenia clavigera that creates the rainbow effect represents a highly specialized organism adapted to extremely specific conditions. It requires oligotrophic water, meaning water with very low nutrient content, to thrive. This dependence on pristine conditions makes the plant an excellent bioindicator of water quality. The presence of blooming Macarenia signals that the river remains free from agricultural runoff, industrial pollution, and other forms of contamination that plague waterways worldwide. In this sense, the rainbow isn't merely beautiful, but serves as a living testament to environmental health, a colorful reminder of what water looked like before human civilization altered so many of Earth's rivers. Protecting this wonder has required significant effort. For decades, the Serrania de la Macarena suffered from armed conflict as various groups contested control of this remote region. The area became largely inaccessible to scientists and tourists alike, though this isolation inadvertently helped preserve its ecological integrity. As peace gradually returns to the region, carefully managed ecotourism has begun, with strict regulations limiting visitor numbers and requiring guided tours. These measures attempt to balance the human desire to witness such beauty with the necessity of preserving it for future generations and maintaining the delicate conditions that allow the Macarenia to flourish. Far to the north and east, across the Atlantic Ocean, another landscape of surreal beauty spreads across the Egyptian desert. The White Desert, or Sahara El Beida, lies approximately 45 kilometers north of the town of Farafra in Egypt's western desert. Here, the familiar golden dunes of the Sahara give way to something that resembles the surface of a frozen alien world, or perhaps a sculpture garden created by wind gods with infinite patience and time. Chalk formations rise from the desert floor in shapes so peculiar and evocative that visitors often stand speechless, struggling to process what their eyes report. These formations resulted from the presence of an ancient sea that once covered the region. During the Cretaceous period, roughly 100 to 65 million years ago, this area lay beneath a vast ocean. Marine organisms, particularly microscopic plankton and various shellfish, lived and died in enormous numbers. Their calcium carbonate shells and skeletons accumulated on the seafloor in layers that eventually compressed into thick beds of chalk and limestone. When tectonic forces eventually raised the seabed and the waters retreated, these sedimentary deposits found themselves exposed to the brutal, erosive power of wind and occasional rain in one of Earth's most arid environments. The sculpting process continues even now. Wind carries sand particles that act as abrasive tools, grinding away at the softer chalk, while harder limestone layers resist weathering more effectively. This differential erosion creates the bizarre mushroom-shaped formations called hoodoos, or tent rocks, that dot the landscape. Some stand as tall as a two-story building, with narrow bases supporting broad caps, looking perpetually on the verge of toppling, yet having maintained their precarious balance for millennia. Others resemble animals frozen mid-motion. Visitors frequently spot formations that evoke camels, chickens, sphinxes, or entirely imaginary creatures. The human mind can't help but seek familiar shapes in these abstractions, projecting earthly forms onto otherworldly geology. The color itself deserves attention. Unlike the warm yellows and oranges associated with typical desert landscapes, the White Desert glows with an ethereal pallor. During midday, under the harsh Egyptian sun, the chalk reflects light so intensely it becomes almost blinding, creating a landscape bleached of color, existing in gradients of white through cream. The effect suggests snow or ice rather than stone. And the cognitive dissonance of seeing such whiteness in the middle of the Sahara adds to the surreal quality. As the sun shifts toward the horizon, however, the transformation begins. The white surfaces become screens for the changing light. Sunset paints the formations in shades of gold, orange, pink, and even purple, while the shadows lengthen into dramatic pools of deep blue and violet. The landscape cycles through an entire chromatic performance, ending with the arrival of night. After dark, the White Desert reveals another dimension of its strangeness. With virtually no light pollution for hundreds of kilometers and the high reflectivity of the chalk formations, the night sky appears with a clarity and brilliance that few modern humans ever experience. The Milky Way sprawls overhead like a river of light, and the white rocks below seem to glow faintly in the starlight, creating an environment suspended between Earth and cosmos. Visitors camping among the formations often report a profound sense of displacement, as though they have awakened on another planet entirely. The silence intensifies this feeling. Without vegetation to rustle or animate to call out, the desert maintains an almost perfect quiet, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind sliding over stone. The ecosystem here appears sparse at first glance, and indeed the White Desert cannot support the abundance of life found in more temperate regions. Yet life persists with remarkable tenacity. Desert foxes, known as fennec foxes, navigate the formations at night, their oversized ears helping dissipate heat and locate prey. These creatures possess an almost supernatural ability to survive on minimal water, obtaining most of their hydration from the small rodents and insects they consume. Gazelles occasionally pass through, though they don't linger long in areas with such limited vegetation. Reptiles, particularly various species of desert monitor lizards and vipers, find the formations useful for shelter and ambush hunting. They wedge themselves into cracks and shadows during the day, waiting for the relative cool of night to become active. Plant life concentrates in areas where occasional rainfall collects, or where underground moisture comes closer to the surface. Hardy desert shrubs send roots astonishingly deep, sometimes extending 10 meters or more to reach water. These plants exhibit extreme drought tolerance. They're capable of lying dormant for years if necessary, then bursting into brief flowering periods when moisture arrives. The timing of these blooms seems miraculous. Seeds that have waited decades in the sand will germinate within days of rain, flower rapidly, produce new seeds, and complete their entire reproductive cycle before the moisture disappears. This boom and bust strategy allows life to persist in conditions that seem fundamentally hostile to biological processes. The cultural history of the White Desert adds layers of human meaning to its geological strangeness. Ancient peoples traversed these regions for thousands of years, following routes between oases and establishing trade networks that connected Mediterranean civilizations with sub-Saharan Africa. Archaeological evidence suggests that the climate was somewhat less severe in ancient times, perhaps supporting slightly more vegetation and wildlife. Rock art found in the broader Western Desert region, though not extensively documented within the White Desert proper, indicates that early humans witnessed and depicted animals like giraffes and elephants that would be impossible in today's extreme aridity. The land has dried progressively over millennia, transforming from marginal grassland to the hyper-arid environment we see now. Modern visitors must approach this landscape with both reverence and caution. The stark beauty can deceive the unprepared regarding the genuine dangers present. Temperatures during summer months regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius, the conditions under which human survival depends entirely on adequate water and shade. Winter brings more comfortable daytime temperatures, but nights that can drop near freezing, a swing of 30 degrees or more between day and night. Navigation poses challenges as well. The formations, while distinctive individually, create a confusing maze when you're among them, and GPS signals can behave erratically. Tour guides familiar with the landscape prove essential for safe exploration, and Egyptian authorities have established protected areas and regulations to preserve both the environment and visitor safety. Halfway around the world, in the Horn of Africa, another extraordinary landscape rises from the Ethiopian plateau, the Simien Mountains, or Semien as they're sometimes spelled. They create a terrain so dramatic and vertical that early European explorers struggled to find adequate descriptive language. These mountains don't rise gradually from surrounding lowlands, but instead present themselves as a massive escarpment, a wall of rock that climbs abruptly from the plains in a series of sheer cliffs, narrow plateaus, and impossibly sharp peaks. The highest point, Ras Dashen, reaches 4,550 meters above sea level, making it the fourth tallest mountain in Africa. But the altitude alone doesn't capture what makes this landscape so otherworldly. It's the erosion-carved architecture of spires, pinnacles, and canyons that transforms these highlands into something resembling a fantastical fortress or the ruins of some titan city. When the geological formation of the Simien Mountains began with the creation of the Ethiopian highlands themselves, a process involving massive volcanic activity approximately 75 million years ago during the Oligocene epoch. Enormous volumes of basaltic lava erupted and spread across the region, building up layers that eventually reached thicknesses of several thousand meters. This volcanic shield created a vast, elevated plateau. Then came the erosion. Over millions of years, water proved itself the most patient and effective sculptor. Seasonal rains, streams, and rivers cut into the volcanic rock, carving deeper and deeper channels. The erosion occurred unevenly, with harder layers of basalt resisting while softer material washed away, creating the dramatic stepped topography we see today. The word itself comes from local languages, reflecting the lived experience of those who knew these mountains intimately. They called it what it resembled in the stark morning light and evening shadows, when the landscape takes on an almost architectural quality. Walking through these highlands feels like entering a world designed by some eccentric artist who rejected conventional notions of how mountains should look. The plateaus stretch flat as tables, then suddenly plunge away into chasms so deep they seem to swallow sound itself. Rock formations rise like ancient towers, their surfaces weathered into patterns that mimic flowing fabric frozen in stone. During the wet season, waterfalls appear seemingly from nowhere, cascading hundreds of meters down sheer cliff faces, their spray creating rainbows that dance through the mist. And these mountains harbor ecosystems found nowhere else on the planet, with plants and animals that evolved in isolation, adapting to the extreme conditions of altitude, temperature swings, and seasonal drought. The gelada baboons that inhabit these heights have become so specialized that they've developed entirely unique behaviors, spending their days grazing on grass like mountain sheep rather than foraging for fruit and insects like their lowland cousins. Their social structures mirror the complexity of the terrain itself, with large troops maintaining intricate hierarchies while navigating the vertical landscape with remarkable agility. Watching them move across cliff faces that would challenge experienced rock climbers reminds visitors that humans aren't the only species to have mastered seemingly impossible terrain. Birds wheel through the thermals that rise from the heated rock faces, species endemic to these peaks, their calls echoing across valleys that stretch for kilometers. The human history woven through these mountains adds another layer of wonder. For centuries, these natural fortresses provided refuge and defensive positions. Monasteries cling to seemingly inaccessible cliff-tops, their presence raising questions about the determination and engineering skill of those who built them. Some can only be reached by climbing chains or navigating paths carved into nearly vertical rock. Inside, ancient manuscripts and religious artifacts have survived, protected by altitude and isolation from the conflicts that periodically swept through the lowlands below. The monks who maintain these high sanctuaries live lives of contemplation, surrounded by vistas that seem to exist at the boundary between earth and sky. Climate plays tricks here that keep visitors constantly surprised. Morning might begin with frost crackling underfoot. The sun rises over distant peaks, painting the rock faces gold and orange. Then by midday, the temperature climbs enough that shade becomes precious. Clouds form below the high plateaus, filling valleys with cotton-white masses that make the mountaintops seem like islands floating in a silent sea. When storms move through, lightning strikes the exposed peaks with dramatic frequency, the thunder rolling across the landscape in waves that take long seconds to fade. Rain arrives in sudden downpours that can turn dry gullies into raging torrents within minutes. The water carrying red sediment that colors everything it touches. The color of the rock itself shifts depending on light and weather. Iron-rich layers glow rust-orange at sunset, while areas of lighter stone turn almost pink in the right conditions. Patches of dark basalt create stark contrasts, and where water seeps from the rock, green moss and lichen add unexpected softness to the hard surfaces. During the brief flowering season after the rains, wildflowers carpet the high meadows between rock formations, their colors made more vivid by the thin, clear atmosphere. Yellow mescal flowers bloom in such profusion that entire hillsides appear painted, their fragrance carrying on winds that seem to come from every direction at once. Beyond Africa, South America holds landscapes equally strange but completely different in character. High in the Andes, where borders blur and altitude makes every action feel weighted with effort, lies a place where water takes on colors so vivid they seem artificial. The lake sits in a depression between mountains that rise like broken teeth against the sky, their peaks perpetually dusted with snow despite the harsh sun that beats down on the Altiplano. Approaching from a distance, the first glimpse stops travelers in their tracks. The water glows an impossible shade somewhere between brick red and deep coral, a color so unexpected in nature that it triggers momentary disbelief. The explanation behind this chromatic marvel involves both chemistry and biology working in concert. The lake is hypersaline, meaning its mineral content far exceeds that of ordinary water. Dissolved minerals from the surrounding volcanic rock, particularly borax and other salts, create a chemical environment hostile to most life. But certain organisms thrive in exactly these conditions. Microscopic algae have adapted to flourish in the salty water, and these tiny plants contain pigments that color them deep red. In concentrations dense enough, they tint the entire body of water. The effect intensifies based on light angle, temperature, and seasonal variations in algae population, so the lake never looks exactly the same twice. The shores of this remarkable lake add to its otherworldly appearance. White mineral deposits accumulate at the water's edge, creating crusty borders that crunch underfoot. In some areas, these deposits build up into formations resembling small geysers or miniature volcanoes, evidence of geothermal activity beneath the surface. Steam sometimes rises from vents around the lake, and hot springs bubble up nearby, their water scalding despite the near-freezing air temperature. The contrast between the hot springs and the icy winds that blow across the Altiplano creates microclimates where warmth and cold exist mere meters apart. Flamingos congregate here in numbers that turn portions of the red water pink with their massed bodies. 3 species feed in these extreme conditions, filtering the very algae that color the water through specialized bills designed for this specific purpose. Their presence seems paradoxical given the harshness of the environment, but they've evolved precisely for such places, finding abundance where other creatures cannot survive. The image of these elegant birds, already pink from their diet, they are standing in water that mirrors their color set against snowy peaks and deep blue sky, creates a visual composition that seems impossible, as if nature decided to push every element to its chromatic extreme. The landscape surrounding the lake extends the sense of being on another planet. The Altiplano stretches away in every direction, a high desert where vegetation struggles to establish any foothold. What plants exist grow low and compact, hugging the ground against winds that blow almost constantly. Strange rock formations dot the plains, sculpted by wind-driven sand and ice into shapes that invite interpretation. Some resemble trees, others animals or human figures, and a few defy comparison to anything familiar. These formations have names bestowed by indigenous peoples who have crossed these highlands for centuries, yet their stories explaining the rock's origins through tales of gods and heroes turn to stone. The elevation here exceeds 4,000 meters, a height where the atmosphere thins enough to change how sunlight feels on skin and how the sky appears overhead. Blues deepen to something approaching purple, and at night, stars emerge with a brilliance rarely seen at lower altitudes. The Milky Way stretches across the darkness like a river of light, so bright it casts shadows, and satellites crossing the sky appear as moving stars on journeys from horizon to horizon. In this rarefied air, distances deceive and sounds carry strangely. A mountain that appears an hour's walk away might require half a day to reach, and conversations can be heard from surprising distances when the wind pauses. Moving north and east across continents brings us to deserts where heat rather than cold dominates, but strangeness remains the defining characteristic. Egypt extends beyond pyramids and pharaohs into regions where geology creates scenes that challenge expectation. In the western desert, far from the Nile and the population centers that cluster along its banks, lies an area where limestone has weathered into formations so white they seem to glow. This place earned its straightforward name from the obvious fact of its appearance, but seeing it firsthand reveals that no name adequately captures the experience of standing among these bleached monuments to erosion. The formations rise from desert floor like sculptures in an open-air gallery where the curator decided white on white should be the only color scheme. Some tower overhead, their surfaces smoothed by wind-driven sand into curves and hollows that suggest organic growth rather than geological process. Others cluster in groups that resemble cities in miniature, complete with structures that could pass for buildings, towers, and walls. Walking among them feels like exploring ruins from some unknown civilization, except these were never built. They simply emerged as softer material eroded away, leaving harder limestone to stand against the elements. The whiteness comes from the rock's composition, limestone formed from ancient marine organisms that lived when this entire region lay beneath a vast sea. As the sea retreated and continents shifted, these deposits found themselves exposed to air and weather. Rain, minimal though it is in the desert, still falls occasionally, and when it does, it reacts with the limestone in ways that enhance the brilliant white color. Wind polishes surfaces to a smooth finish that reflects sunlight with eye-watering intensity during the day. Walking here at midday requires squinting even with sunglasses, the glare bouncing from every surface until the entire landscape seems to emit light rather than merely reflect it. At sunset and sunrise, however, the white stone transforms. Low-angle light paints the formations in shades of pink, orange, and gold, the colors shifting minute by minute as the sun moves. Shadows grow long and dramatic, turning spaces between formations into rivers of darkness that contrast sharply with the illuminated surfaces. Photography becomes almost compulsive as the light changes, each moment creating a different mood. A new interpretation of the same static rocks. Night brings yet another transformation when moonlight renders everything ghostly and mysterious, the white formations seeming to float in darkness like icebergs in an obsidian sea. The desert surrounding these formations adds to the sense of being somewhere disconnected from normal geography. Sand dunes ripple away toward distant horizons, their surfaces marked by wind patterns that change constantly. Occasionally, patches of darker rock break through, basalt remnants of ancient volcanic activity that predates the limestone by millions of years. These dark stones, scattered among the white formations, create stark contrasts that emphasize how thoroughly erosion has worked its art here. Hardy desert plants occasionally appear, tough specimens that somehow extract enough moisture from the arid environment to survive, their gray-green forms providing rare color in the predominantly monochrome landscape. The silence here carries weight. With no vegetation to rustle, no water to flow, and no animals calling, the only sounds come from wind moving around and through the rock formations. This creates an almostal effect as air flows past different shapes, producing low tones that rise and fall with wind strength. On calm days, the silence becomes so profound that visitors hear their own heartbeat, the blood moving through their ears, suddenly loud in the absence of other sound. This quiet invites contemplation, a space where thoughts seem to echo in the emptiness, where the usual mental chatter that fills daily life fades against the backdrop of geological time. History layers meaning onto the natural wonder. This desert has seen human passage for millennia, with ancient peoples leaving evidence of their presence in the form of tools, pottery fragments, and occasionally rock art. Trade routes once crossed here, connecting oases and leading caravans between distant destinations. During various conflicts, armies have moved through these wastes, and evidence of their passing sometimes surfaces when wind shifts the sand. More recently, explorers and adventurers have come seeking the dramatic landscapes and the testing environment that deserts provide. Each group has added their small mark to the ongoing story of this place, though the stone formations remain indifferent, continuing their slow evolution regardless of human drama. Far to the south, another desert holds wonders of a different sort. The Namib stretches along Africa's southwestern coast, a narrow band caught between the Atlantic Ocean and the inland plateau. This desert claims distinction as possibly the oldest on the planet, with conditions remaining arid for something approaching 50 million years. Such extreme age means that life here has had vast spans of time to develop unique adaptations. Among the most remarkable features of the Namib are the dunes, mountains of sand that climb to heights exceeding 300 meters, their faces rippling with patterns created by constant wind. The sand itself carries color that seems too rich for simple geology. Iron oxide stains the grains deep orange and red, particularly in the most famous dune fields, when viewed from high vantage points. And these dunes create patterns of light and shadow that turn the landscape into an abstract painting. The windward sides glow bright orange when sunlight hits them directly, while the slip faces, protected from the sun, appear deep rust or even burgundy. Between the dunes, white salt pans and gray clay flats provide contrast, and when rain falls, these pans can flood temporarily, creating shallow lakes that mirror the dunes and sky in perfect reflections. Walking among these dunes requires respect for their scale. What appears from a distance to be a modest hill reveals itself as a massive mountain of loose sand that yields with every step. Climbing to the top demands effort, with progress measured in hard-won meters as feet sink and slide. But reaching the crest rewards the struggle with views that extend for kilometers. It's wave after wave of dunes rolling away toward horizons blurred by heat shimmer. The wind up high blows steadily, carrying fine sand that stings exposed skin and creates a constant hissing sound. Ridge lines curve in graceful arcs, their shapes constantly being reformed by the same wind that built them grain by grain over countless years. Life persists here in ways that seem impossible. Beetles emerge during the night to collect moisture from fog that rolls in from the ocean. They climb to the tops of small dunes, angle their bodies just so, and wait as tiny droplets condense on their backs and run down channels in their carapace directly into their mouths. Fog sustains other creatures too, from scorpions to lizards to the occasional snake, each with strategies for surviving weeks without rain, extracting every possible bit of moisture from the humid air that the cold ocean current generates. Plants grow in the gravel plains between dunes, species that might wait years for enough rain to flower, then bloom in sudden profusion, producing seeds that remain dormant until the next rare wet period. The coast, where this desert meets the ocean, creates its own strange juxtapositions. Seals colony on beaches where bones of whales and dolphins lie scattered among the sand. Yet evidence of the harsh environment that extends even into the waters offshore. Shipwrecks rust in the surf, vessels that met their end on this treacherous coast now slowly disintegrating, their metal returning to oxide that mirrors the color of the sand. The ocean itself, cold from the Benguela Current, generates massive upwellings that bring nutrients from the deep, supporting fish populations that in turn attract seabirds in enormous numbers. The contrast between the lifeless appearance of the dunes and the biological productivity of the nearshore waters illustrates how narrow the band is between abundance and scarcity. Human presence in the Namib has always been tentative and sparse. Indigenous groups developed sophisticated knowledge of where to find water and food in an environment that appears to offer neither. Their descendants still maintain connections to this land, possessing understanding of seasonal patterns and resource locations passed down through generations. Colonial powers largely ignored the desert interior, finding nothing there worth exploiting, though they eagerly claimed the coastline for its access to fishing grounds and later mineral deposits. Today, the region attracts scientists studying extremophile organisms and ancient climate patterns, as well as photographers and travelers seeking landscapes that push the boundaries of what Earth can look like while remaining recognizably terrestrial. Returning to South America, Colombia offers a natural phenomenon that operates on a completely different principle from anything else yet described. Here, water becomes the artist, painting with a palette derived from aquatic plants and algae. The river flows through remote region where access remains difficult and tourism carefully controlled. During specific months, conditions align perfectly to transform this watercourse into something that defies quick explanation. Multiple colors appear simultaneously in the water, creating ribbons and patches of yellow, green, blue, black, and most strikingly, brilliant red and pink that flow side by side, distinct yet blending at their edges. The mechanisms producing this chromatic symphony involve timing, water chemistry, and biology intersecting in rare combination. The river bottom supports plants that change color throughout their annual cycle. These aquatic macrophytes respond to water level, light intensity, temperature, and nutrient availability, or their pigmentation shifting as conditions change. During the period between wet and dry seasons, water level drops, flow slows, and sunlight penetrates more effectively to the riverbed. The plants respond by producing compounds that protect them from UV radiation and help them photosynthesize more efficiently in the changing conditions. These compounds color the plants in vivid hues. Different plant species occupy different sections of the riverbed, each with its preferred combination of depth, current, and substrate. This natural zonation means that distinct patches of color appear where each species dominates. Red and pink tones come from plants in the genus Macarenia, which produces pigments similar to those in autumn leaves. Yellow and orange sections result from different species with their own unique chemistry. And green areas indicate either younger plants or different types altogether. Black patches appear where deeper water or shadows prevent plant growth, and blue sections reflect the sky where the water runs clear and deep. The river itself flows through ancient geological formations, its course carved over millions of years through rock that varies in hardness and composition. This creates a varied stream bed with pools, rapids, small waterfalls, and calm stretches. Each section has its own character, and the plants respond accordingly, creating a constantly changing display as the river winds through the landscape. Walking along the banks means encountering new color combinations around every bend, each pool presenting a different artistic composition. The surrounding forest closes in overhead in many places, creating a tunnel of green that makes the colored water seem even more vivid by contrast. The biological productivity required to generate such intense colors means this river supports extensive food webs. Fish dart through the colored water, their scales flashing as they move between light and shadow. Insects swarm above the surface, their life cycles tied to the aquatic plants below. Birds patrol the banks and hunt from branches overhanging the water, while caimans sun themselves on rocks smoothed by endless water flow. The entire ecosystem pulses with life, the colored water serving as foundation for complexity that extends from microscopic organisms to large predators. Human relationship with this remarkable place has evolved over time. Indigenous communities knew the river long before outsiders arrived, incorporating it into their cosmology and using its resources sustainably. When word of the colored water began to spread more widely, interest grew in seeing and photographing this natural wonder. The challenge became balancing access with preservation, allowing people to witness something extraordinary while preventing the damage that uncontrolled tourism can inflict. Current management requires guides, limits group sizes, and restricts visits to specific periods, helping ensure that future generations will also have the chance to see water running in colors that seem borrowed from fever dreams. The desert stretches endlessly in every direction, a landscape so dominated by sand and rock that the appearance of something white and sculptural feels like a hallucination brought on by heat and thirst. Egypt's White Desert exists as if a cosmic artist decided to work in chalk and wind, creating forms that challenge the mind's ability to categorize what it sees. These aren't mountains in any traditional sense, nor are they carved monuments despite their resemblance to deliberate architecture. They're limestone formations weathered into impossible shapes, standing against the pale sand like frozen ghosts of creatures that never existed. The whiteness itself arrests attention first. Against the typical ochre and gold of desert landscapes, these chalk formations gleam with an intensity that shifts throughout the day. Under midday sun, they become almost blinding, surfaces reflecting light with such purity that they seem to generate their own illumination. During the golden hours of sunrise and sunset, they transform into something warmer, absorbing amber and rose tints that make the stone look soft despite its obvious hardness. At night, when the desert reveals its spectacular ceiling of stars, the white shapes become lunar presences, pale sentinels under constellations that wheel overhead with the clarity only desert air can provide. Walking among these formations means confronting shapes that the mind struggles to process. One resembles a mushroom large enough to shelter under, its cap balanced precariously on a narrow stem that seems impossibly fragile given the weight it supports. Another suggests a chicken, or perhaps some prehistoric bird, frozen mid-step. A third might be a sphinx, or a submarine, or something entirely without earthly reference. The shapes emerge from processes measured in geological time, and from winds carrying sand particles that act as abrasive tools, wearing away softer layers while leaving harder sections intact. What appears random holds patterns governed by prevailing wind directions, by variations in stone density, by the architecture of how ancient seas deposited layers of marine organisms that would eventually become this chalk. The formations stand scattered across the landscape in concentrations that vary, sometimes clustered together like gatherings of enormous sculptures, sometimes isolated as solitary markers in vast emptiness. Their distribution follows no pattern obvious to casual observation, though geologists can read in their placement the story of how this region emerged from ancient waters, how tectonic movements shaped the underlying structure, how millions of years of erosion revealed what had been hidden beneath accumulating sediments. Each formation represents a collaboration between creation and destruction, between the deposition of material and its gradual removal, a dance that continues even now, though the changes occur too slowly for human perception. The desert floor between the white sculptures holds its own character, sometimes fine sand that shows the tracks of every creature that crosses it, sometimes harder packed surfaces scattered with darker stones that create sharp contrast against the prevailing whiteness. Occasional patches of vegetation manage survival here, tough desert plants that have evolved strategies for extracting moisture from air and conserving every drop. Their presence a reminder that even in apparent desolation, life finds methods to persist. And these plants change the immediate environment around them, their roots affecting water movement through soil, their shade creating microhabitats where temperatures differ enough to matter for smaller organisms, seeking refuge from the sun's relentless exposure. Temperature swings define desert existence, and the White Desert experiences extremes that would astonish those familiar only with moderate climates. Daytime heat can make the white rocks too hot to touch with bare skin, the stone absorbing and holding solar radiation with such efficiency that it radiates warmth hours after sunset. Yet when night falls and the dry air holds no moisture to trap heat, temperatures plummet dramatically. The cold can be sharp enough to make breath visible, to make visitors grateful for whatever protection they've brought against the chill. These daily cycles of heating and cooling contribute to the weathering process, causing expansion and contraction that gradually fractures stone, creating cracks that wind and blown sand can exploit, continuing the slow transformation of solid rock into these improbable forms. Ancient peoples passed through this landscape, leaving traces of their presence in scattered artifacts and the occasional rock art that speaks to human responses to this strange environment. What they thought when they saw these white formations remains unknown, whether they attributed supernatural origins to such unusual shapes, or simply accepted them as features of a land that offered both resources and challenges. Water would have been the primary concern, the location of reliable sources determining routes and settlement possibilities. The desert's harshness demands respect from anyone who enters it, a reality unchanged across millennia despite modern technology that makes temporary visits far safer than they once were. The ecosystem surrounding the White Desert exists in that liminal space between barely inhabited and truly barren. Desert foxes leave their delicate tracks across sand, hunting for rodents and insects that themselves survive through remarkable adaptations. Birds pass overhead, some resident species that nest among the rocks, others migrants using the desert as a corridor between distant territories. Reptiles emerge during optimal temperature windows, cold-blooded bodies requiring careful management of heat gained and lost. Even invertebrates find niches here, beetles and scorpions, spiders and ants. Each species occupying a role in the sparse but functional web of relationships that constitutes desert ecology. Visiting the White Desert requires preparation and usually guides familiar with both the landscape and the skills necessary for safe navigation through terrain that can be disorienting. The formations that seem like obvious landmarks can look remarkably similar when you're among them, and distances deceive in the clear air where lack of familiar reference points makes judging how far away something sits nearly impossible without experience. Modern visitors come with cameras and expectations shaped by photographs seen online or in publications, seeking to capture images that convey the strangeness of this place. Yet photography struggles to communicate scale and presence. The way these formations loom when you stand beside them, the texture of weathered chalk when you run your fingers across its surface, the quality of silence broken only by wind moving across stone and sand. Conservation concerns that apply to many spectacular landscapes also touch the White Desert, though its remoteness provides some protection from the pressures of mass tourism. Still, the accumulation of visitors over time creates impact, from litter left behind, to the gradual erosion of paths, to the temptation some feel to climb on formations or carve names into soft stone. Balancing access with preservation requires ongoing attention, establishing protocols that allow people to experience this extraordinary landscape while minimizing the traces they leave. The desert's vastness makes comprehensive monitoring difficult, relying on education and ethical behavior as much as enforcement. The broader region holds other features of geological interest, though none quite match the White Desert's particular combination of color and form. Nearby areas show the black volcanic rocks that contrast so dramatically with the chalk, evidence of the complex geological history that shaped this part of North Africa. The interplay of different rock types, different ages, different formation processes creates diversity within what might appear at first glance to be monotonous desert. Each variation adds layers to the story, chapters in a narrative stretching back through deep time to periods when this land bore no resemblance to its current condition. Climate change introduces new variables to desert ecosystems already characterized by extremes. Shifting precipitation patterns, changing temperature ranges, and alterations in wind regimes all potentially affect the delicate balances that allow life to persist in marginal environments. The weathering processes that shape the chalk formations operate on timescales that make short-term changes difficult to detect, yet the cumulative effects of altered conditions will eventually show in subtle shifts in how erosion proceeds. Desert environments, often perceived as static because they change so slowly, actually respond to environmental shifts just at different paces than more obviously dynamic ecosystems. Far from the chalk landscapes of North Africa, another distinctive environment presents its own otherworldly character. The Simien Mountains of Ethiopia rise in dramatic fashion, creating highlands that contrast sharply with the lower elevations surrounding them. These aren't smooth, rounded peaks worn down by age, but jagged formations with profiles that look serrated against the sky, as if the earth thrust upward with such force that the resulting shapes remain sharp and angular. The mountains create their own weather systems, trapping moisture that falls as rain at elevations high enough to support ecosystems found nowhere else in the region. The approach to these highlands reveals the landscape's character gradually. Lower elevations show typical patterns of East African vegetation, adapted to dry conditions and seasonal variations in moisture availability. As altitude increases, the environment shifts, temperatures moderate, and precipitation becomes more reliable. The transition zones hold particular richness, species from different elevation bands overlapping in narrow corridors where conditions suit multiple communities. These ecotones often support high biodiversity, serving as refuges during climate fluctuations when conditions at higher or lower elevations become temporarily unsuitable for certain species. The highlands proper present landscapes that combine dramatic topography with unexpected lushness given the elevation. Grasslands spread across plateaus, their extent creating vistas that seem to stretch toward distant horizons. The grass itself grows in tussocks, creating texture across the landscape, responding to seasonal rains that turn everything green before dry periods impose dormancy and golden colors. These high-altitude grasslands support grazing animals, including several species found nowhere else, their evolution shaped by the particular conditions of these isolated mountains. Among the most distinctive residents are the Gelada baboons, primates uniquely adapted to this highland environment. Unlike other baboons that inhabit lower, warmer regions, Geladas have evolved specialized diets focused on grass, an unusual adaptation for primates. They live in groups that can number in the hundreds, social structures complex and hierarchical, interactions governed by established protocols, and individual relationships built over years. Watching these animals move across the landscape, sitting to feed on grass blades and seeds, their distinctive chest patches of bare red skin visible, provides insight into how life specializes for specific environments. How evolution crafts solutions to particular challenges. The cliffs that characterize the Simien Mountains create vertical landscapes of staggering scale. Escarpments drop hundreds of meters, faces of rock that fall away into misty depths where clouds gather and shift, occasionally parting to reveal the lowlands far below. These cliff systems provide habitat for other species found exclusively in these mountains, including the Walia ibex, wild goats that navigate steep rock faces with casual confidence that seems impossible given the exposure. Their hooves grip tiny ledges. Their balance allows movement across slopes that would mean certain death for most creatures, their behavior a testament to specialized adaptation to vertical terrain. Birds use the mountain's dramatic topography as well, raptors riding updrafts along cliff faces, with smaller species nesting in crevices protected from predators by sheer drops. The bearded vulture, a massive bird with distinctive appearance and unusual dietary habits, patrols these highlands looking for bones dropped by other scavengers or remaining from predator kills. These birds have evolved the ability to digest bone, extracting nutrients other scavengers can't access, even carrying large bones aloft and dropping them on rocks to shatter them into more manageable pieces. Watching one of these enormous birds soar past a cliff face, its wingspan allowing it to ride air currents with minimal effort, reinforces the sense that these mountains support communities of specialists, species whose survival depends on the particular combination of conditions found here and nowhere else. The jagged peaks themselves tell stories of the region's geological history, of volcanic activity that built these highlands, of subsequent erosion that carved the current landscape from the original formations. The rock shows layers and intrusions, evidence of multiple episodes of formation and transformation. Weathering continues the sculpting process, frost action at high elevations breaking apart stone, water flowing through cracks and widening them over time, the gradual movement of material downslope through processes that operate slowly but relentlessly. The mountain's current appearance represents just one moment in ongoing transformation, a snapshot of forms that will eventually change, though the timescales involved stretch beyond human comprehension. Human presence in these highlands extends back millennia, and communities adapting their lives to the challenges and opportunities of high-altitude existence. Traditional agriculture here requires understanding of microclimates, of which crops tolerate the conditions, of how to manage livestock in environments where forage quality and quantity vary with season and elevation. Stone terraces speak to generations of effort channeling water and preventing erosion, maintaining productive soil in landscapes where heavy rains could quickly wash away what isn't protected. Villages cluster where water sources prove reliable, where aspect and elevation combine to create favorable conditions for habitation. The interaction between human communities and the mountain ecosystem raises questions of sustainability and change. Traditional practices evolved over long periods often achieve balance with available resources, using methods that allow continued productivity across generations. Modern pressures, including population growth, integration with market economies, and introduction of new technologies, shift these relationships, sometimes in ways that stress the environment's capacity to support the demands placed on it. Finding paths that allow communities to improve their circumstances while maintaining the ecological functions that ultimately support all life in these mountains requires ongoing negotiation between different priorities and understandings of what the landscape represents. Conservation efforts in the Simien Mountains focus on protecting the endemic species that make these highlands significant from a biodiversity perspective. The creatures found here and nowhere else face particular vulnerability, their limited ranges meaning that events affecting the mountains potentially threaten entire species. Habitat degradation, human-wildlife conflict, and climate change all present challenges requiring active management and cooperation between conservation organizations, government agencies, and local communities whose lives intertwine with the landscape in immediate, practical ways. The visual drama of the Simien Mountains attracts visitors seeking to experience landscapes that defy expectation. Trekking routes follow paths through the highlands, offering views that shift with every turn, revealing new perspectives on peaks and valleys, on the interplay of light and shadow across complex topography. Morning light can fill valleys with mist that slowly burns away as the sun climbs higher, revealing layers of ridges receding into blue distance. Afternoon storms build dramatically, clouds forming above peaks and releasing rains that sweep across the landscape in visible curtains, the smell of water on rock and grass filling the air with particular freshness. Photography drawn to these mountains attempts to capture not just the grand vistas, but the details that create the overall impression. Close examination reveals the textures of different rock types, the patterns created by lichen colonizing stone surfaces, the way grass moves in wind sweeping across exposed ridges. Wildlife photography here requires patience and often long lenses, allowing capture of images without disturbing animals going about their essential activities. The challenge lies in conveying scale, in helping viewers understand the true dimensions of cliffs that dwarf the tiny figures of ibex picking their way across faces, of valleys deep enough to generate their own weather systems. These environments, stark and seemingly barren from distance, actually contain remarkably adapted communities of organisms that thrive where others would perish. Alpine plants here grow in compressed mats, minimizing exposure to wind while maximizing absorption of warmth from sun-heated rocks. Many flower with surprising intensity, their blooms disproportionately large for their diminutive stems, as though all their life energy concentrates into brief weeks of summer reproduction. Seeds produced here must withstand freezing temperatures, and sometimes remaining viable for years while awaiting conditions favorable for germination. The soil itself develops slowly at these altitudes, where weathering proceeds at glacial pace, and organic matter accumulates incrementally from the limited plant material available. Birds that nest on these peaks demonstrate extraordinary adaptations to their environment. Some species have evolved larger hearts and lungs relative to their body size, modifications that support sustained flight in thin air where oxygen molecules spread farther apart. Their breeding cycles synchronize precisely with seasonal patterns, ensuring that demands of feeding nestlings coincide with peak availability of insects and other prey. The cliffs themselves provide nesting sites relatively secure from ground predators, although exposure to weather becomes a constant threat. Winds strong enough to dislodge poorly anchored nests sweep these faces regularly, creating selective pressure that favors birds capable of constructing secure structures in crevices and on ledges that seem impossibly precarious. The geological story written in these rocks extends back hundreds of millions of years, preserving evidence of ancient seas and vanished ecosystems. Fossils occasionally surface in the sedimentary layers, reminders that these heights once lay beneath ocean waters, accumulating deposits grain by grain in marine environments. The forces that lifted these former sea floors to their current elevations continue working, though at rates imperceptible within human lifespans. Earthquakes occasionally shake these regions, releasing accumulated stress as tectonic plates grind past each other, adding infinitesimal increments to already impressive heights. Traditional communities that have lived in sight of these mountains for generations often regard them with reverence, incorporating them into spiritual practices and cultural narratives. Stories passed down through oral traditions explain their formation through mythic frameworks, attributing their creation to divine actions or legendary events. While these narratives differ from scientific understanding of plate tectonics and erosion, they reflect something equally important: the profound impact these landscapes have on human imagination and the ways they inspire contemplation of forces larger than individual lives. Pilgrimage routes sometimes lead toward sacred peaks, paths worn by countless footsteps over centuries, marking journeys undertaken for religious observance, personal transformation, or simple desire to experience these places directly. Shifting attention to Bolivia's Altiplano reveals another face of Earth's capacity for creating landscapes that seem almost fictional in their strangeness. Laguna Colorada spreads across the high plateau like a vast pan of rust-colored water, its shallow depths reflecting sky while supporting populations of flamingos that feed on algae thriving in the mineral-rich liquid. The color comes from sediments and microscopic organisms adapted to the extreme conditions, particularly the high concentrations of minerals and the intense ultraviolet radiation at this altitude. The lake has no outlet, meaning water leaves only through evaporation, leaving behind dissolved minerals that accumulate over time, creating chemistry that would kill most aquatic life, but that specialized species have turned to their advantage. 3 species of flamingos gather here, their pink plumage deriving from carotenoid pigments in the organisms they filter from the water. They stand in shallow sections, their heads submerged as specialized bills strain food from the murky water with remarkable efficiency. Their presence in such numbers creates spectacle that draws photographers and naturalists from across the world, though reaching this location requires crossing rough roads and adjusting to altitude that leaves newcomers breathless with minimal exertion. The flamingos themselves experience none of this difficulty. Their physiology perfectly suited to extracting oxygen from thin air while wading through water cold enough to numb unprotected human feet within minutes. The Altiplano contains numerous other lakes and salt flats, each with distinct chemical composition and appearance. Some appear brilliant white, their surfaces crusted with salt that forms geometric patterns as water evaporates and minerals crystallize. Others show shades of green or blue, their colors determined by different combinations of algae and minerals. The largest, Salar de Uyuni, becomes particularly extraordinary during wet season when a thin layer of water transforms the salt flat into a mirror stretching to the horizon in all directions. The sky and ground merge in this state, eliminating visual reference points and creating disorientation for those standing on its surface. Perspective becomes meaningless when nothing provides scale, when clouds below seem as real as those above. This mirror effect has made Salar de Uyuni valuable for calibrating satellites, as the perfectly flat, highly reflective surface provides a known reference point for sensors designed to measure earthly features from orbit. The salt flat forms patterns visible from space, polygonal shapes outlined where salt has heaved upward slightly as underlying brines move and minerals precipitate. These formations, called salt polygons, can span several meters across, their raised edges creating subtle boundaries between slightly sunken centers. Walking across them provides strange tactile experience, the surface crunching underfoot with sound unlike anything encountered elsewhere. Beneath this salt lie reserves of lithium, one of the world's largest known deposits of this increasingly valuable element. The mineral concentrates in brines below the solid crust, trapped in liquid that has accumulated there over millennia. Extracting it without destroying the unique landscape presents challenges that continue generating debate among those who see economic opportunity and those who prioritize preservation of the environment in its current state. The tension between these perspectives reflects broader questions about how humanity relates to unusual places, whether their value lies primarily in resources they contain or in maintaining them as they exist for future generations to experience. The Altiplano's climate creates harsh conditions year-round, with cold temperatures even during summer months and minimal rainfall outside brief wet season. Vegetation struggles to establish itself across much of the region, with hardy grasses and small shrubs dominating where plant life exists at all. Wildlife here must cope with temperature swings that can shift dozens of degrees between day and night, with intense solar radiation that penetrates the thin atmosphere with minimal filtering. Vicuñas, wild relatives of domestic alpacas, graze on tough grasses, and their fine wool providing insulation that allows them to maintain body temperature in cold winds that sweep across open terrain. They move in small herds, alert for predators while foraging on plants that grow in sparse tufts between patches of bare ground. Andean foxes patrol these spaces, their reddish-gray coats providing camouflage among rocks and dried vegetation. They hunt rodents that burrow beneath the surface, creating networks of tunnels that provide refuge from both predators and weather extremes. These foxes have adapted to elevation and thin air, just as mountain-dwelling birds have, their cardiovascular systems modified to function efficiently with reduced oxygen availability. Their presence indicates that even in apparently desolate environments, food chains persist. The energy flowing from sun to plants to herbivores to predators in patterns that mirror those in more obviously fertile locations. Moving north into Peru brings us to more rainbow-colored landscapes, this time in the form of Vinicunca, sometimes called Rainbow Mountain. The mountain stripes of red, yellow, green, and blue come from different mineral deposits laid down over geological time, each layer representing specific conditions that prevailed during its formation. Iron compounds create the red and yellow bands, copper contributes green hues, and other minerals add additional colors to the palette. These layers remained hidden beneath permanent snow and ice for centuries, only revealing themselves relatively recently as warming temperatures caused glaciers to retreat, exposing the colorful rocks beneath. The mountain's appearance has made it suddenly popular with tourists, creating both opportunity and challenges for nearby communities. The trek to viewing points requires hiking at high altitude, demanding several hours of effort that leaves many visitors exhausted, yet the steady stream of people continues, drawn by images shared through social media and travel articles. Local people have responded by offering guide services, pack animals, and other assistance, creating income from this unexpected resource. However, the rapid increase in foot traffic raises concerns about erosion and environmental impact, the same concerns that arise whenever previously isolated places become easily accessible. The striations on Vinicunca extend across other nearby peaks as well, suggesting that similar patterns exist throughout the region. waiting to be revealed as ice continues retreating. Each exposed section tells stories about ancient environments, about seas that once covered this area, about volcanic activity that deposited ash and minerals, about pressure and heat that transformed original sediments into the metamorphic rocks now visible. Reading these stories requires geological expertise, the ability to identify rock types and interpret sequences, to understand what each layer indicates about conditions millions of years ago. Water plays essential roles in creating and maintaining many of Earth's most unusual landscapes, but it also destroys, as rivers carry away material that took ages to accumulate. The balance between construction and destruction determines whether landforms persist or disappear over time. In some places, deposition outpaces erosion, as building features upward or outward. In others, erosion dominates, carving away solid rock and transporting it elsewhere. The interplay creates constant change, though mostly at rates too slow for human perception during individual lifetimes. Australia's Pinnacles Desert demonstrates what happens when erosion removes softer material while leaving behind more resistant formations. Thousands of limestone pillars rise from yellow sand, their shapes varying from sharp spires to rounded stumps. They formed within ancient sand dunes, where water seeping through sediment deposited calcium carbonate that cemented sand grains together. Over time, wind removed the loose sand, leaving behind the cemented portions that now stand as separate towers. The process continues today, with some pinnacles slowly crumbling while others remain intact, protected by harder crusts that resist weathering more effectively. The desert supports surprising amounts of life despite its apparent barrenness. Wildflowers bloom after rare rains, carpeting spaces between pinnacles with color that contrasts dramatically with the pale sand and limestone. Birds nest among the formations, finding shelter from sun and predators within crevices and shadows. Reptiles hunt here, their cold-blooded metabolism well suited to environments with extreme temperature fluctuations. They bask on sun-warmed limestone in morning, absorbing heat that will fuel their activity through cooler hours, then retreat to shade when surfaces become too hot for comfort. The pinnacles sit within a larger region that contains other remarkable features, including coastal dunes and ancient reefs that now lie far inland. Now, the western coast of Australia preserves geological history in particularly accessible forms, with features that formed at different times now existing side by side, allowing comparisons across millions of years. The pinnacles themselves continue attracting researchers interested in understanding how similar formations develop, what conditions must exist for their creation, and what their presence indicates about past climates and environments. New Zealand's Putangirua pinnacles show how erosion creates badlands, landscapes where water carves gullies and ridges into soft sediment with remarkable speed. The formations here consist of gravel beds deposited by ancient rivers, material that compacted but never fully hardened into solid rock. Stream erosion has carved this material into intricate networks of fins and spires, creating terrain difficult to traverse but fascinating to observe. The pinnacles appear fragile, as indeed they are in geological terms, their shapes shifting noticeably after heavy rains when runoff further excavates the gullies. These formations appeared in films, their otherworldly appearance perfect for scenes requiring alien planets or fantasy landscapes. That filmmakers chose to use natural locations rather than constructing artificial sets speaks to how convincing these places are as representations of impossible worlds. Their actual existence becomes almost harder to believe than the fictional narratives they helped illustrate, reality exceeding what imagination alone might conjure. Iceland presents perhaps the highest concentration of unusual landscapes within any comparably sized area, and its position atop the mid-Atlantic ridge creating constant geological activity. Volcanoes emerge from beneath glaciers, producing interactions between fire and ice that generate steam explosions and volcanic glass. Hot springs bubble throughout the island, their waters heated by magma chambers lying relatively close to the surface. Geysers erupt on predictable schedules, shooting columns of boiling water dozens of meters into the air before subsiding until the next cycle. The island's youth in geological terms means erosion has not yet softened the harsh edges of its formations. Volcanic craters retain sharp rims, lava fields show clear textures indicating how the molten rock flowed before solidifying. Black sand beaches mark locations where waves have ground volcanic rock into fine particles, creating shores dramatically different from the white sand beaches of coral and shell fragments found in warmer regions. Icebergs calve from glaciers that flow toward the coast, creating lagoons filled with fragments ranging from house-sized chunks to pieces small enough to hold in one hand. Jökulsárlón, the glacier lagoon, showcases this process beautifully. Icebergs drift in dark water, their blue ice contrasting with the black sandbanks surrounding the lagoon. The ice appears blue for the same reason deep water does, because it absorbs red wavelengths while scattering blue light. The clearest, most compressed ice shows the deepest color, while sections containing air bubbles appear white. Each iceberg displays unique patterns of color and transparency, marks of the particular conditions under which it formed. Seals swim among them, hunting fish that thrive in the cold water. Birds perch on floating ice, resting between feeding flights. The lagoon connects to the ocean through a narrow channel, allowing icebergs to drift toward the sea. Many become stranded on the beach as tides shift, where they slowly melt under sun and wind. The beach becomes littered with ice sculptures in various stages of degradation, from large intact blocks to fragments barely recognizable. Photographers gather at dawn and sunset, seeking light that transforms ice into jewels glowing against black sand. The transient nature of the subjects adds urgency to these efforts, as each piece will look different tomorrow or may vanish entirely, carried back to sea by waves or melted into water that percolates into sand. Vatnajökull, Europe's largest glacier, covers substantial portions of Iceland's interior. Beneath its ice lie several active volcanoes, creating situations where eruptions must melt through hundreds of meters of ice before breaking surface. These subglacial eruptions produce massive floods called Jökulhlaups, sudden releases of meltwater that can carry enormous volumes down valleys and across plains. The water often contains icebergs and volcanic debris, giving it destructive power that reshapes landscapes within hours. Bridges and roads have been swept away repeatedly, requiring reconstruction after each major eruption. The glacier's surface contains ice caves that form when meltwater carves tunnels through the ice. These caves display extraordinary blue coloring. The compressed ice filtering light into wavelengths that make the interior seem to glow with its own luminescence. The caves are temporary features, changing shape each year as melting and refreezing alter their configurations. Entering them requires caution, as ice can collapse without warning, especially during warmer periods when melting accelerates. Professional guides lead expeditions into stable sections, providing access while managing risks. Lava fields cover large areas of Iceland, their surfaces ranging from smooth Páhoho flows that solidified while still moving to jagged Ai formations that broke into chunks as they advanced. Walking across Ai lava requires attention to every step, as the sharp fragments can easily turn ankles or cut through inadequate footwear. Moss eventually colonizes these fields, adding green color to black rock, though the process takes decades or centuries depending on climate and location. The moss grows slowly, accumulating millimeters per year, but once established, it creates habitats for other organisms, beginning soil formation that will eventually support more complex plant communities. Hverir, a geothermal area in northern Iceland, demonstrates what Earth's surface might have looked like before life established itself widely. Fumaroles vent steam and sulfurous gases, creating yellowed deposits around their openings. Mud pots bubble with thick, grayish liquid, the sound and appearance calling to mind giant cooking pots left unattended. The ground itself appears unstable, crusted in places but wet and soft in others. Warning signs caution visitors to remain on marked paths. As breaking through thin crusts could lead to burns from hot mud or steam beneath. The smell of hydrogen sulfide, like rotten eggs, pervades the area, growing stronger near active vents. Despite extreme conditions, microorganisms thrive here, hyperthermophiles that grow best at temperatures that would quickly kill most life forms. These organisms represent some of Earth's oldest lineages, their biochemistry providing clues about how early life might have functioned before oxygen became abundant in the atmosphere. Scientists study these communities for insights into the origins of life and for possibilities about what forms life might take on other planets or moons with similar extreme environments. Madagascar's Tsingy formations present yet another expression of limestone's potential for creating bizarre landscapes. The word Tsingy translates roughly as where one cannot walk barefoot, accurate description of these forests of stone needles that rise in dense arrays. Water has dissolved and carved the limestone into sharp pinnacles, creating natural barriers so effective that sections of forest isolated within Tsingy areas contain species found nowhere else, their populations cut off from related groups by impassable stone. The formations can extend for kilometers, their gray surfaces creating strange contrast with green vegetation that manages to root in crevices and pockets of soil. Navigating Tsingy requires care and often ropes, as the pinnacles stand tall enough and close enough together that falling between them could result in serious injury. Some areas contain caves and underground rivers. The water that carved the surface features continuing its work from below. Wildlife has adapted to this environment in remarkable ways, with lemurs leaping between pinnacles with agility that seems impossible, their hands and feet finding purchase on surfaces that appear too sharp and smooth to grasp. Birds nest on the formations, building in locations that protect eggs and chicks from predators unable to reach the exposed platforms. The Tsingy ecosystems demonstrate how physical barriers create biological diversity. When populations become isolated, they diverge over time through different mutations and adaptations, eventually becoming distinct species unable to interbreed with their relatives. The Tsingy have created natural laboratories for studying these processes, their impenetrable barriers functioning like ocean straits or mountain ranges, but at much smaller scales. The unique species that have evolved here face particular vulnerability, as their small populations and limited ranges make them susceptible to extinction from single events, whether natural disasters or human-caused disturbances. Climate change threatens many of Earth's most unusual landscapes, altering the conditions that created and maintain them. Glaciers retreat, exposing new terrain while eliminating formations carved in ice. Permafrost thaws, destabilizing ground that had remained frozen for thousands of years. Rainfall patterns shift, bringing water to deserts while creating droughts in previously wetter regions. These changes happen rapidly compared to the geological processes that built the landscapes, so giving ecosystems little time to adjust. Some places will undoubtedly vanish in recognizable forms within coming decades or centuries. Ice caves will melt away entirely. Salt lakes might dry completely or expand beyond current bounds. Biological communities adapted to specific narrow ranges of conditions will find themselves in environments they cannot tolerate, leading to extinctions that further alter these already unusual ecosystems. The loss extends beyond the physical features themselves to include cultural knowledge, the traditional understanding held by communities who have lived alongside these places for generations, who know them intimately through direct experience passed from elders to young people. Yet Earth's capacity for creating strange and beautiful landscapes continues undiminished. Volcanoes still erupt, as building new islands and mountains. Rivers still carve canyons through rising plateaus. Chemical and biological processes still paint rocks in improbable colors. The specific features we recognize today may not persist, but new ones will form through the same fundamental processes, manifestations of the planet's endless creativity in combining basic elements and forces into unexpected configurations. Our presence as observers remains brief within geological time, allowing us to witness particular moments in ongoing stories that began before humans existed and will continue long after our species vanishes. Protecting places that inspire awe and wonder serves purposes beyond simple preservation of unusual geology or rare ecosystems. These landscapes challenge our assumptions about what is possible or real, expanding our understanding of the world's diversity. They humble us with their scale and age, reminding us that human lifespans represent momentary flickers within much longer cycles. They also connect us to something many find difficult to articulate, a sense of meaning that comes from witnessing beauty and strangeness that exists without human purpose or design. The value of such experiences cannot be quantified easily, measured in familiar units, or calculated as economic worth. Yet most people who encounter these places describe them as transformative, as shifting perspectives in lasting ways. Earth remains a planet of wonders, its surface decorated with features that seem designed to provoke amazement and curiosity. From rivers that run red with mineral-rich water to mountains striped like rainbows. From salt flats that mirror the sky to valleys carved from solid rock, from hot springs that paint terraces with flowing stone to caves that glow with bioluminescent creatures, the variety seems endless. Each landscape tells stories about the planet's history and ongoing processes, stories written in stones and water, in living communities and empty spaces. Learning to read these stories, to understand the forces and timescales involved in creating what we observe, enriches our relationship with the natural world while deepening appreciation for the complex systems that sustain all life. The strangeness of these places should not make them seem separate from more familiar environments. The same forces that shape deserts and mountains also work on the gentle hills and valleys where most people live. And the difference lies mainly in degree and visibility, not in fundamental processes. Understanding unusual landscapes helps us recognize similar patterns elsewhere, seeing the geology and ecology that operate everywhere, even when they produce less dramatic results. A road cut through a hillside becomes readable as layers of ancient sediment. A stream bank reveals how water shapes terrain. The entire landscape becomes legible as expression of natural processes rather than static backdrop to human activities. These remarkable places exist because our planet remains geologically active, still generating heat from radioactive decay in its core, still cycling material between surface and interior through plate tectonics, still harboring water in quantities sufficient to drive weathering and erosion. Earth's particular combination of size, distance from the sun, presence of moon, and abundance of water and carbon creates conditions unlike anywhere else in our solar system, conditions that allow for extraordinary diversity in both living things and the landscapes they inhabit. Our planet's specialness within the known universe makes its unusual features even more precious, unique expressions of rare circumstances that permitted not only life to emerge, but also intelligence capable of appreciating the beauty and wonder of the world that produced it.